There's just a lot of shoveling shit that has to happen, and that's pretty much true for any work. It's true for what I do. But if you're aligned with where you're going, if you believe in the mission, you can shovel a lot of shit with a smile on your face and mean it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Season 2 of the What You're About podcast with me, Chad Aboud. And this one is a special season because it's actually a collab season with the Good Lawyer podcast. And the reason why we're doing a collab season this time is because we have a really deep mission overlap. If you listen to any of the episodes in season 1 of the What You're About podcast, you know that I deeply care about two things: helping individuals uncover their natural gifts, and then 2, how they can bring those skills into their career so that they're happier, more fulfilled, more successful. And this is where the overlap with Good Lawyer comes in, because this is a big part of what they do for the legal industry. So if you don't know Good Lawyer already, they're a platform that creates access for incredible companies to get talented lawyers from Good Lawyers Network in a fractional work structure. And here's the reason why I really appreciate this fractional work structure is, one, there are so many businesses that need seasoned lawyers within a budget and within business goals that are specific to them. They might not need another full-time lawyer or their first full-time lawyer, but they do need seasoned talent. And conveniently, there's also these incredible lawyers who they don't want to work in a law firm, or they don't want to be a full-time in-house lawyer anymore. But they have all of these skills and passion to bring to the industry, to bring to these companies, and it allows them to practice law in a way that also works for their life. So for this season 2, we're bringing those missions together. We are going to have some of the most remarkable general counsels, advisors, creators, tech leaders in the legal industry, and we're going to talk to them about how they built these really intentionally designed careers. They're proving that there are many ways to build a massively impactful career that's also deeply meaningful for them. And today, we have one of those folks, Tony Albrecht. You're going to know Tony. If you're on LinkedIn, you know Tony. He's everywhere. He's a LinkedIn brand builder and ghostwriter. He's the creative director at Contender. He's the co-founder of Unrationed, where he brings together these really wonderful groups of people to have life-changing experiences, often with some incredible feat of long-distance running or walking. He's an author in the creative arena. He's a former litigator who lawyered as a digital nomad before that was even a thing that most people thought you could do. And the thing that I love about Tony the most is that he brings his creativity to the legal industry that really needs it. He's fun, he's funny, he is trying to make the legal industry more interesting. And I feel fortunate to call him a friend. So Tony, thank you for joining us. So glad that you're here.
My friend, that was probably the best podcast intro I've ever had. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad.
It's really good.
Hey,
you're a pro.
And you know what? It brings me a lot of joy to let people know the impact that they're having. Because here's two things that I've always noticed. One is it's actually really hard for us to see our own impact because these things are easy for us. Like, you have a lot of dry wit, you're very creative. It's actually harder to notice that in ourselves because it's easy. And we were taught that things have to be very hard in order to be good. We have to feel the friction. Well, you're naturally great at that. And so, me and you have talked about this a lot, so you've heard this from me before. But for many folks who haven't heard this, we actually underplay our own gifts. And the other thing is, not many people tell us the stuff we're amazing at because they're looking at Tony saying, like, clearly he's a creative guy. He loves it. It's easy for him. He's amazing. I don't need to tell Tony. He already knows. And so for those two reasons, we actually miss the things that I like to call like our 9 out of 10s. And we spend all of our time focused on these 3 out of 10s and 5 out of 10s. So it actually brings me a lot of joy just to tell you all of the impact that you make, man. And you make LinkedIn more fun. You make it more fun for me. And when I write, I'm often thinking, I wonder what Tony would do here. So, I can't wait to get into the journey that you've built from being a litigator while you were traveling and living around the world, deciding to walk away from the industry. And, maybe my first question for you is, I bet if we went back to like December 2021, you would have thought LinkedIn was a dumpster fire. You would have told people that's a place where everyone just brags about themselves and put job updates and like, okay, maybe it's fine to know where Chad and Tony are working, but who cares? And now you've probably written more posts for lawyers than maybe anyone around the world. And you've built your business that feeds your family through LinkedIn. That was only 2.5 years ago. Like when you think back about that distance, what was the biggest signal, the biggest moment where you were like, not a dumpster fire. This actually could be a thing that I build my business on?
It's a great question. Getting right into it. So December 2021 actually is a poignant month. I would say that was the month where things really flipped for me, where I really saw that matrix-like quality that I've come to describe when it comes to LinkedIn. That there's the way that we experience the platform when we first get on, where it is the place where you stash your digital resume and then basically ignore it. Right? There's nothing worth paying attention to. And I did that through basically my career from the time I got on while I was in law school, I think in 2008, until I was preparing to get out of the law in late 2021 after my wife and I moved to Canada. And at that time, my decision, the decision to move to Canada, we had a pretty clear decision. We could stay in St. Louis, Missouri, my hometown, and I make partner at the firm I was at, doing insurance defense litigation in 2021. Or we could move to Canada. My wife is Canadian. And basically, I'm on a dead-end path professionally and got to figure out what comes next. We chose that one, moved up in the spring of 2021. I ended up working for that firm still for another 6 months while trying to figure out what happened next. Ended up working out something with a buddy of mine to join a consulting company in a business development role. He said, you need to learn how to do LinkedIn. I was not enthused, but said, all right, I'll try. And that was when I started paying attention in a different way, which sort of started to expose me to a few different voices, a few people who were interesting. And that's when I got to basically that. Is it the blue pill or the red pill? Which I never remember. I think it's the red.
Maybe you took both, and that's why it made it so exciting. But okay, so think about this. What I hear from lawyers a lot about LinkedIn is that, if you don't engage, then your feed kind of looks like a dumpster fire. And so they're saying like, who's even interesting out here? This thing is just terrible. And so how did you just stumble across people? Was it because you were forced to engage because it was part of your job that it like started catering some more interesting voices to you? Like, how do you even find someone that's interesting if you've never even clicked the like button?
Yeah, this question is really valuable. And there's something I've been thinking about more and more, where I think of two specific people. One is a person who is like that me I just described, where your entire career you go through ignoring LinkedIn and you just don't see anything that's worth paying attention to. And then there's another person who is the person who has started engaging and they are around. And then you'll see these posts pop up pretty regularly about, have you noticed how LinkedIn is getting this way? Like everything's sounding the same, right? Everything's all the same vanilla stuff. And both people I'm describing there are running into the same problem, which is that the algorithm is basically going to feed you what you tell it to feed you. So if you don't tell it to feed you anything, then you just get, and if you aren't adding anybody to your network, you're just going to get that, whatever that flow is based on the people in your network. And since the vast majority of us in law, we built our networks essentially thinking that you only get to be in my LinkedIn network if we've met in real life,
Right.
right? That's the way most people think about it.
Some
So then
people
you're
still say
seeing,
that to me on LinkedIn. If there's like a connection, they like want to do a meeting first. And I was like, well,
Mhm.
if you're actively engaging in this thing, that becomes a little bit difficult.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And so you have that mentality of, you know, you don't let people in your network, which then means that the things that LinkedIn is going to feed you, because LinkedIn feeds you things based on who's in your network
Mm.
and what they're engaging with. So if everybody in your network does not post things and doesn't really engage, then you are going to get basically, I hate to say it this way, but the bottom of the barrel of content that's out there, right? Whereas like once you start engaging, that person complaining or whining about what their feed looks like, you're getting that because that's what you're looking at. And if you want to change it, you can by giving more attention to something else
Mm.
that you want more of. So this brings me around to your question. If I'm a lawyer who's just starting to wrap their head around this thing that you and I are talking about, which most people really still have no frame of reference for, the percentage of people who post stuff on LinkedIn is like under 5%. I've seen numbers as low as 1% out of the billion plus users. So there are very few people who post on LinkedIn with any regularity. And the way that you start to open things up, one thing you could do is if one post pops up that is genuinely interesting, you read through that post, you react to that post. If you feel brave enough to leave a comment sharing an insight on that
Yeah.
post, you do that,
Yeah.
just expressing your gratitude or something that came to mind. Um, if you're not connected to the person who wrote the post, send that person a connection request saying what you liked about it and look at the other comments down there. And if there are people who had shared things that are insightful, as you so often do, like you can like the comment. And I would say if you see somebody who left a good comment, send them a connection request as well.
Yeah.
And once you start doing this, the algorithm is taking that in. It's like you've been silent forever, and then all of a sudden you speak up, and the algorithm goes, "Whoa, what we have here?" And so it's going to then it's going to say, "Oh, this made them do something. Let's give them more of that." Right. And that's where things can start to.
Well, it's very similar to real life. Like this is what I think this is where people get a little bit confused or tricked with LinkedIn is they think of it as a separate thing from life. But if you just think of it as how you build relationships in your normal life, if you go to an event or you walk outside, you are more likely to meet someone than if you don't. If you go up to a group, you're more likely to meet someone if you don't go up to them. If someone shares something interesting in that group, you're more likely to form a bond if you react or engage. The words react and engage didn't start because of social media. Those are real life words that were then taken to social media. And so if you say to someone, hey, Tony, that was super thoughtful because I had never thought through the way that that plays out before. Now that you've said that, I'm actually thinking back to the way that I've done that the last 5 years. That's a good one. And so that part, I think when we say it feels intellectually obvious, but we don't emotionally absorb it yet. Here's how I think you emotionally absorb it so that you see change. Don't imagine yourself as the sender of the communication. Imagine yourself as the recipient. So instead of me trying to believe, oh, LinkedIn matters because if I go up to Tony and I say that, Tony, that was a cool thing that you said, there'll be maybe some relationship built. No, no, no. Imagine yourself as Tony. So someone comes up to you and they say, oh, Chad, that was a super smart thing that you said. I'd never thought about it that way. How am I going to feel about the person who said it to me? And if they say, hey, Chad, like all this stuff you've been talking about, I've been trying to work through that for 10 years. And I think you've kind of unlocked something for me. Would you be willing to give me 5 minutes to chat about that today over a coffee? What do you think the odds are that I'm going to say yes? And so when you imagine yourself as a recipient, it is very obvious the impact of being actively engaged. It's harder to imagine it as the sender. And so that's what I always tell people when, Tony is creating so much opportunity for lawyers to build their voice and their brand. If you imagine yourself having the impact as the recipient instead of the sender of the communication, you'll feel the impact immediately. You put one post up, if anyone reacts to it, you're like, I appreciate that person. It's so obvious as the recipient. But Tony, you were talking about a great point around the attention piece and where you're paying your attention. The algorithm will feed it to you. You've done this in different stages of your life where you've noticed that your attention is shifting away into some new area, some new space. And, I kind of want to think about, how did you build this career? Like, you were a litigator, climbing those steps, making the money, becoming great at something, but clearly your attention was shifting towards something else and you got pulled into an entire new sphere of life and work. And so how did that start to happen for you? You're a St. Louis litigator, doing a great job, making the money. What happened to your attention that it started shifting to something new?
All right. So before we hit record, said we're not going to let me go on any 9-minute diatribes here. So you're going to.
I'm watching the time.
You're talking about the transition I made out of law and how I found my way to contender.
Yeah.
I think what helped me, what was I noticing there?
Yeah.
And that the short answer to that is, by 2020, I could see my future. Right? It was all very clear. It was pretty predictable, and I just didn't want it. Basically, seeing what doing that job in that firm, frankly, like just about any firm in the niche that I had spent most of my career in. A lot of upside to that life. Like, there were a lot of good. I worked with good people. I had a pretty high quality of life, but just again didn't want it. And so, like, the thing that I'm noticing in that time was that there was also the aspect of, my wife, who I mentioned is Canadian. She and I, when she agreed to move to St. Louis in 2017, she told me I had 5 years before I'd be moving to Canada. And then between the COVID response in the US and the election coming up in 2020, we're like, it may be time. So,
what were the things, though, that when you say you didn't want it? Because I bet you there's a lot of folks that are going to listen to this and are going to hear you at the Good Lawyer Future of Law Summit in November, talking about building a brand, talking about the transition of like figuring out what you care about. What specifically was it for you that was like the impact that was too heavy, that you were like, I can see the impact on my career, I can see where it's going? What were the things that you didn't want?
You mentioned creativity a couple times, which I appreciate. Is by 2020, I'll say that my creative muscles were getting back in shape. We're just gonna make a very quick tangent about that 1 year sabbatical of mine in 2013 that you and I have talked about at length. That ended up turning into essentially 4 years as more or less like a contract attorney, digital nomad, between 2013 and 2017. And I'll say that period, so I had already had a moment where, I saw where I was going and thought I should see if I can try something different. And during those 4 years, spent time in 20 plus countries, met the woman who would become my wife during 10 days of silence in the Indian Himalaya, walked across Spain twice, started a couple businesses. I had all sorts of fun. But the things I noticed in 2020 actually looked a lot like the things I noticed in 2012, where I found myself largely just not as engaged in what I was doing. And so I was working in a practice that was like, there was a lot of repetition. right? And so I've learned, actually got diagnosed as ADHD at the age of 40, which is an interesting rabbit hole. But, um, just seeing in retrospect how the that repetition, once I understand the pattern, it's nice to be able to hit those point ones, ad infinitum. But I wasn't learning. I wasn't being challenged. I wasn't doing anything hard really. And so I think that was one huge piece of it. Um, and then there was just there's a line from the poet Mary Oliver says, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And that was a line that messed with my head 10 years ago pretty well. And it was still messing with my head several years ago, where there was just an idea of potential and being forced to conclude that I don't know what I'm capable of, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to have a shot at even realizing it if I'm sitting in this office focusing on billing 200 hours a month every month for the next 15 years.
Yeah. There was like an energy of like this growth and creativity and wonder in you that was just becoming so much stronger over time. And it was like coupled with, kind of the other side of the coin, which was this repetitious kind of feeling of this isn't as valuable and as impactful as I can be, like wearing you down. It's just so interesting because, we've talked about this, it like resonates so deeply with my career. And, I always think about there's things that we can do because we've been trained to do them or we have the skills to do them. There's also things that we are drawn to doing. And there can actually be a big distinction there. We can be great at a lot of things, but whether it's great plus brings us energy to do it afterwards. Like after this recording, I'm going to have more energy than when I had before it. That's a big signal to me. And so when versus like I can negotiate any SaaS agreement, with anyone, I'm probably going to have lost some energy by the time I'm done doing it. And I've always found that's a good signal when we're thinking about what we're drawn to. And so for you, you're going around the world, you're creating different businesses, you're traveling to all kinds of different cultures and learning how people value time and energy. What did you feel like you were drawn to during that period of time that really encouraged you to step fully outside of the legal industry? Because you were doing this part-time thing for a while and you were learning about the world, learning about your potential, learning about your creativity. What were some of the actions or some of the inspirations that really pushed you to say, okay, it's time to fully step outside of this legal thing if you're really going to create the impact that you can?
I really appreciate the focus on impact there. That resonates. Where as you were describing that, I was thinking about the difference between work and capital W work. I think I've taken this from the War of Art, but just the capital W work being the things that if you don't do them, they won't get done. Whereas work is, what you're saying, what you get paid to do, what you maybe have skills to do. And those circles don't necessarily overlap on the Venn diagram of our careers, right? And where I was at in law at that time, it was so funny. My managing partner was also a good friend. So when I told him that I was moving to Canada, and then 9 months later, when I told him, I think I'm just done practicing, I gave him 6 weeks notice and said, like, I'll do everything I can to make sure that how can this place run without me, essentially, as your number two of this growing business. Chad, he still hasn't replaced me fully. It's been 2.5 years, and he's like worked around it, but everything has been fine. And so like that juxtaposing capital W work, if I don't do it, it can't be done with, actually nobody actually really needs to even be in that seat. We're actually good without it.
Right.
That realization was so poignant for me. But to circle back around to your question more directly, when I left the law I mean, if I were still in the US, then maybe I wouldn't have left the law.
Mm.
Maybe I don't take as big a leap,
It's like a
but
confluence of things where you've like taken this leap plus this leap, and it was almost like nudging you forward or showing you that you could. Like you moved, you had traveled before, you had like these experiences to like build some muscle memory. Was it like a feeling like that?
yeah, so taking that leap in 2020 where again mind goes over the edge and you say, okay, I guess I'm just taking a shot at this. I did it with the muscle memory of having done it before, right? Of taking leaps and just trusting things are going to work out. There's a Ray Bradbury line that I really like. So we must continually be jumping off cliffs and growing wings on the way down. And I have found that my risk tolerance has decreased since becoming a father in 2018 and then again in 2021, but not that much. I think my risk tolerance is still fairly high. Um, but for me, that understanding of things have a tendency to work out. You need to plan and have some contingencies ready and backups and that safety chute. But things have a way of working out usually. And so, you know, I ended up taking I think like a 60% pay cut to make the leap to my buddy's consulting company. And you know, my wife and I had a lot of conversations about how this was going to play out since she had been staying home with our two kids. It was a lot of risk, and it was only, I guess my last day in law was October 22nd of 21, and then I went all in on Contender. My first day full time was Halloween of 2022. So basically 53 weeks
You
later.
know, on that money piece, it's such a great point. I think it's really important because, you know, when I'm like coaching folks, they're often in this moment where they want to do something different, whether it's like fractional legal work because they've got a creative thing that they want to do, kind of like you actually did when you were a nomad, like traveling around doing fractional legal work part-time. And when folks are thinking about doing that, they get very stressed about the money and they keep telling me like, but I've got to make this amount of money. And my initial response to them, kind of like this conversation with your wife, was I'm not as worried about your top line number. I need to know what your bottom line number is. Because in between the top line and the bottom line are a lot of variables that you can play with. And even the massive expense items like your rent or your mortgage payment is also, you know, it's a variable piece that you can change. Like I know for you, you know, you moved up like north of Toronto and you have an intergenerational home there. And so there's lots of ways, whether you're an owner or renter, whether you change the location of where you work, whether you change the size of where you live, that are massively impactful to the bottom line number because you have a lot more control over costs than you do over revenue when you decide to make a leap into something that also fills other areas of your life that matter to you. And so, you know, I'm not so worried about your top line because your top line is only there because your cost base requires it. What I'm interested in is like, which costs do you need less of if you felt your life was more meaningful? And I think of things like luxury, convenience, vice. If you take your family to Hawaii and you live on the East Coast and you do that twice a year, some trip like this, because things are a bit shaky and you want to prove everyone that you love them, that is a very expensive way of proving that you love people. You know, there's another version where if you just have more capacity to dedicate the energy on every regular day of the week, you might not need the very luxurious trip for people to feel the care that you have. And that is a very big difference in your cost line items that can allow you to build things like Contender. You know, so when I'm hearing what you're saying, I just wanted to make sure that everyone listening to this doesn't feel like, oh, well, you know, Tony's cost base just allows for that. Chad's cost base allowed him to leave being a GC. No, you actually have to think about what your costs are and then adjust for them if you really want to pursue something that maybe aligns with your life a little bit more. And so, you know, when you think about being this, incredible writer, especially for lawyers on LinkedIn, and you've got the creative agency and you're an author. And what is the part of building that life that has been the most meaningful for you when you think about the last 2.5 years? Like, what was the meaning beyond just the creativity and work that, we've talked about? Like, what is the meaning that you were trying to add into your life that you didn't feel you had before?
Hmm. Couple things come to mind. One is, let's say, about my life at home, and the other is about my life at work. And on the home front, something my dad tells me regularly is he wishes he had done things more like I'm doing them now,
Wow.
which has meant a lot to me. Where my dad was an engineer who then kind of took on more leadership roles in businesses and business development, and he traveled a lot when me and my sisters were growing up, and so I remember him being present as much as he could. Like if he was in town, he was around, but he regrets how much of our childhood and our formative years he missed. And so COVID helped with this a little bit, but since leaving the law and then starting my own shop, uh, I've really tried to prioritize being there, being present and like really present in the house where it's always a work in progress with the screens, and once you become an entrepreneur, it can maybe even get even harder to turn it off. Though I had a really hard time turning it off when I was litigating. It's just like
Yeah.
the hamster wheel
Yeah.
of the billables was just intense.
Yeah.
And I was working a lot of nights. And like on the weekend, I just try to get an hour or two in, that sort of stuff. And so on the home front, being able to say, okay, I'm pretty much done it by 4 p.m. every day. Like 4 p.m. every day is like that's when I'm kicking into dad mode. Um, and I try not to do anything on the weekends related to work, and so just like being there for bedtime and for bath time and for dinner time and being able to cook and being able to do the stuff on the weekends has been so meaningful.
It's the energy too that you have too, right? It's not even like the time of being there because you run your agency, so you can at 4 o'clock, if you want to call it, you can call it. But it's also, do you have the capacity to give your kids the focus and your partner and yourself the focus and the energy? Like there's kind of two pieces. There's like the ability to be there, and then what do you have when you are there? And a lot of people think like, oh, well, if I go like fractional legal, kind of like Tony did before he went fully in, and then I'm picking up these other things, well, I'm still going to be as busy. But this is what I was saying earlier, which is, are you doing activities, at least some, that bring you energy, instead of activities that you can do very well but only deplete your energy? Because I know from my own version of this career, this really intentional career that you've built, is that after this, I would have way more energy if my daughter was home right now to be doing something with her, because I feel much more fulfilled and I feel like I am creating impact that I am here to create. And so it's not just about how busy we are, it's also about like, how do we feel after we do that work?
That's beautifully said. And that piece is absolutely critical. This hasn't quite made it onto our core values list at Contender, but we talk about the idea of shoveling shit a lot. That, there's just a lot of shoveling shit that has to happen. And that's pretty much true for any work. It's true for what I do. Um, but if you're aligned with where you're going, right? If you believe in the mission of what's happening, then you can shovel a lot of shit
Very true.
with a smile on your face and mean it,
That is
right?
very true.
And that piece of it, um, I love that. I feel like I'm turning into my father, where I just keep getting up earlier and earlier, and like now these days I'm up by 4:30 without really trying.
Yeah.
It's getting weird, but yeah, I find that I can basically do my morning routine, get into it in the 5 o'clock hour, and turn off at 4, kick into dad mode. But then it's like let's go to the beach. Let's go to the playground. I'll cook dinner. We'll handle bedtime, and it can be 9 o'clock, and I've been rolling hard for 16 hours, and just feel great about it.
Yeah.
Those.
I think a lot of it is because like there's an agency piece of like designing your life and choosing it. Now, everyone's still always like someone's got a stakeholder always, whether it's your employer, whether it's multiple providers, whether it's individual clients because it's your own business. Everyone's got someone that they are kind of reporting to in a sense. But if you believe in what you are doing because it uses your greatest skills and it's a path that is very motivating for you, you feel a lot differently about it. I know that I do. And so when I think about Contender, Tony, everything that you have built over the last 2 years, where is it going? Like, you've been growing a lot. The message is always growing. The impact is always growing. Like, what does the future of the legal industry, the future of law for Tony look like?
That's a great question. And that dovetails with the second thing I was saying about the meaning, how it relates to work, to what we're building at Contender, where that thing you're saying, Chad, about finding the things you're great at, right? Your real, you might call sweet spot. I think that's an EOS term. The word that came to mind for me was leverage. That because that idea you were talking about with the money mindset of I need to make this much and I need to, it's like thinking about it in a very linear way. What I've learned, what you've learned as well, and a bunch of our other friends have learned, is once you get out of that mentality and think about it in a less linear way, start to think about it in terms of leverage, which is to say, how do I take the things that I am best at and that have the most value to other people and that I love doing, or like I enjoy doing, give me energy, that Ikigai Venn diagram, right, that runs around out there. Where's that sweet spot where all those things overlap? It's really hard to find that in a company or in a law firm. There are just so many competing interests, right? There's almost like and you can do this in a side hustle capacity, right? Which ultimately, I guess, is kind of what I did, where I took on my first ghostwriting contracts while I was still with that consulting company. And it was only like another month before the CEO of that consulting company said, dude, you need to go all in on this. Like, what you're doing here is kind of ridiculous. And that was really good advice. Josh said, I'll be your investor, I'll be your partner, whatever you want, but get out of here, go do that. So Josh is indeed
That's thoughtful.
Partner in Contender. Yeah, I've been really fortunate to have my buddy's influence in my life in that way.
And do you think for you, it's like, as this designer of Contender and as you're helping lawyers build their brand, like, when I see you and what you're building now, it's like really deep insights that are also practical about how lawyers can actually build their voice. And so, there's other folks that do this or attempt to do this and helping lawyers build their voice. But for you, what do you feel like as Contender continues to grow? What's going to be the future piece that's motivating for you that you feel like is your differentiator because you love it?
Yeah, I had to be talked into starting Contender, and just starting a LinkedIn ghostwriting agency aimed at helping law firm owners. 3 years ago, it wouldn't have occurred to me that this was a way to make money, right, at all. And then once I got semi-accidentally gained traction on LinkedIn and then started helping other people grow their presence a little bit, kind of just seeing how fairly straightforward it was. If you just learned some basic rules, you could start to make progress. And then once I started actually writing for, one person and then another person, and then my first lawyer, saying, okay, this is actually really interesting. Like the leverage that we had, right? So it was my background as an attorney combined with my understanding of LinkedIn by virtue of basically I posted every day in 2022, starting January 1. I was basically posting daily, just getting a ton of reps. I was able to just create this very specific offer, right? Where we've been able to help lawyers gain traction overnight. And the way I think about it, to actually answer your question directly, um, is like the way I see my own career unfolding from here relative to the legal profession is I've been ambivalent about really like the law entirely. You know, I say like it was the worst version of myself who decided to go to law school. That was when I was really struggling with alcohol, and now, you know, just celebrated 14 years since my last drink. So, you know, like that's been really helpful. And like the farther I get away from my last drink, it almost felt like the farther I was getting away from the thing that made me go to law school in the first place, which was just fear of failing, basically. And law school seemed like a safe path to success. And so I've had this complicated relationship with how I came to be a lawyer, and then being like, well, so many lawyers are unhappy or you know, do I really want to work with lawyers and like focus on that? Um, what I've discovered, number one, I get to work with some really inspiring people. That the people who are gravitating toward doing what we do are people that I'm honored, really honored to help share their message. That the underlying skill set that we're working on is this idea of building a magnetic online presence. So it's like, how do you show up in a way that makes you magnetic?
Yeah.
So that certain people, well, the people you want to have an impact on, are drawn to you. And the flip side of that, that people who aren't into what you're doing will be repelled. And like, how do you learn how to do that? Where we didn't learn this stuff in school, or at least they still weren't showing it when you and I were getting out of school, right?
Yeah.
And so where there are skills around how you show up online that we have to develop basically from the couch. So many of our muscles in that way have atrophied. And then there's that creative aspect of what does that look like?
Yeah.
So once you get over that mindset block, what do you actually say, and what do you actually put out there? And so like the more the way I see the future of not just the legal profession, but the economy is that the internet has just flipped the dynamics of who gets attention and how, where people like you and I, the truth is that when it comes to LinkedIn, we have more reach on LinkedIn than some of the world's biggest law firms, or even some of the world's biggest brands. And that's a really wild thing to say, but it's so powerful that, you know, if you can find that thing that you can do that brings you energy, that you're really good at, that there's a market for it, that other people are trying to solve that problem, you have so much leverage to be able to then, you know, that people pay as much as they do for what I'm doing. It still blows me away, to be honest.
Well, I think the benefit of what you do is you prove it out by the work that you put out there. Your own content is interesting, it's compelling, it's creative. Clearly the folks that are working with you are having, you know, incredible traction. And so there's just so many data points that people can gather, which I think is amazing. You know, I want to close us out here with 3 quick questions. So quick question, quick answer. I want to know the first thing that comes to your mind. If you were talking to 2012, 2013 Tony, what would you say now? What advice would you give is going to be the most important kind of tactical thing for 2012 Tony to start doing to create a more intentional career?
I think I already mentioned the 2 things I would say. The Mary Oliver line about what you do with your one wild and precious life, and that Bradbury line about jumping off cliffs. And I would add a third one, Buddhist teacher whose name escapes me. The bad news is you're falling, and the good news is there is no ground. And so just that basic idea for that guy was like, you're going to be all right.
Right.
you can leap and you'll be all right.
Okay, question 2. I love that. Question 2. I think there's almost like there's inspiration plus tools there. I like that because like tools without inspiration, it can get a little bit too boring. We need both. And so I love that. Okay, question 2. What is something that you wish everyone knew about, like, off scripting, as you call it, going off the beaten path? Because so few people really do it, especially in the legal industry. And there's so many like kind of fear boundaries put up before folks are willing to try. So now that you've been on the other side of it, what is the one thing you wish folks knew about what it's like on the other side of that fear?
I'll preface this by saying that I think that the vast majority of people actually aren't cut out for that. Like, I don't think the vast majority of people even want that. So I'll aim this, let's say, at the subset people who might be a fit for them.
Or even the middle ground of like people want to half do what you're doing and half do legal services.
Well, yeah. So I'm thinking about basically just people who feel like they're not doing what they want to be doing, or that they're meant to be doing, or that they're best cut out to do, right? My advice there is the life you want is most likely on the other side of, I would say, that leap, but breaking it down more, say there's so much value. You don't need to quit your job, sell all your shit, and travel halfway around the world. You can just start to create a little space in your life. Just like figure out how to create a little bit of space to let yourself dream into what life could look like, or what you would want life to look like. So many of us get stuck and just feel like we're just tied, right? It's golden handcuffs. It's just climbing that ladder. You're stuck there. And if you can just find a little bit of space between your ears, a little bit of time in your day, just like let yourself dream. You don't even have to do anything. Just let yourself think about, what would I do if I could do anything? Just like,
yeah, it gets the wheels going. I love that.
It does.
My last question for you is, we've had a lot of fun conversations over the last few years on runs, coffees, chats like this. What is something that you're curious about me, or that we've talked about just at the surface that we haven't talked about enough? What is something that if you were interviewing me right now, you'd want to know?
The thing that comes to mind is you and I started our businesses around the same time, right?
Yeah.
And we've gone about it very differently, where I fell into having a very clear business model.
Yeah.
We're like, we still only have one offer basically. And it's the same, the number keeps going up of how much it costs, but it's the same basic offer. Whereas you have taken this much more divergent approach to growing your business and finding your work. And we have talked about this at some length, but we haven't talked about it since, at least it's been a few months now. And frankly, it's a topic I'm endlessly fascinated by. And by that I mean making it work in, I'm inclined to call it a liminal space, where it's what you're doing is working, and it continues to grow. But whenever we talk about it, you're like, yeah, I'm trying this. Like, you have different things that are working.
Right.
But it's like, what's this going to look like in 6 months? I don't know. I don't.
Why aren't I following the niches, or the riches are in the niches, huh?
Well, I think you are. I mean, you're fairly niched in that who you talk to is very clear, and it's very specific. And the change you want to help those people make is fairly specific. But there's that mechanism of, how do you take those people and that change and put structure around it in terms of the product or service in a way that is readily replicable?
Yeah.
Right. And you've, I don't know if resisted is the word, like you've just been experimenting with different things in a way that a number of these different things are working pretty well. And I, yeah, I have a lot of respect for how you're making that work, particularly like as a partner, as a father, where like, the stakes are like I was building a business that was more like that when I was, 33 and single and didn't have any kids. And risk tolerance was higher,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Now my risk tolerance is lower. And I feel like I would find that to be really challenging,
Right.
even though my impulse is still to do that, to experiment with like 5 different ideas every day.
Okay, so for folks that don't don't know exactly the different things that Tony's talking about that I'm doing. So I do one-to-one coaching, I'm doing kind of B2B workshops and presentations. I'm a strategic advisor to Good Lawyer. So there's a bunch of different pieces there. And the way that I've always thought about it is it's the same thing being deployed in different ways depending on who needs it. And so it's not the spoke of the wheel that is this one spoke. I think of the hub as the message that I care deeply about and the impact that I want to make. I want to help individuals figure out their most natural gifts, and I want to make their way forward easier in their career. That's what I deeply care about. That can be deployed in many ways. It can be deployed to an individual who's trying to grow their career. It can be deployed to a business that's trying to unlock the talent that's within their business. It can be deployed by helping, a platform like Good Lawyer give their 170 lawyers a greater ability to express their value and also to be connected with companies who see their value. So for me, it's always been about this one message. And I've held so firm to that because that is the thing that brings me the energy. Any individual output isn't the thing. For me, it's the message. And so my risk that I've taken is I haven't said to people, I do one-to-one coaching for 42-year-olds with 2 kids that want to go from AGC to GC. This is what a lot of gurus will tell you to do. And the reason why is not because I think that's bad. I don't think that's right for me because I wouldn't have the energy to continually show up in that way every day. And so what I've found is I create my own leverage. I really like this leverage piece you're talking about, which is I hold space for discovery of things that I don't even know people want me to do yet. And the only way that discovery happens is if I hold extremely tight to my message and share it. Otherwise, it is impossible for people to know. And this is how everything that's ever come to me has come, is that, I've coached people who are from Seattle to Paris, from real estate to insurance to tech to law. I've helped, B2B that's about inclusivity. I've also helped like strategy and market access. It all comes from the same message, but I would never get those opportunities if I wasn't amazingly clear about that's what I care about. And I allow people to tell me how it helps them.
I hear you. And I think that's true.
But
The but there, and it's a silver lined but. I had that resistance as well. Like when I started Contender, I was thinking about do I really want to focus on lawyers? Do I really want to niche in that way, right? We help this person in this specific way. Get that specific in saying just LinkedIn, as opposed to like, we'll help you with branding workshops or other platforms, yada, yada, newsletters, yada, yada. And what I'll say is I got talked into it a year in was when I really started leaning with that. Thanks to Sam Brown, another LinkedIn dude. And I changed up my profile, changed up how I talked about myself.
Yeah.
And I'll say my inbound started increasing dramatically. And it started increasing both among the people I said I worked with in that specific way and people who didn't fit that, but would reach out saying, I know I'm not this, but would you consider working with somebody like me?
So here's where I think I've never explained this clearly in our conversations is I'm not resistant to anything. It doesn't feel like a resistance inside me. It feels like this is how I am meant to show up. And I have no issue with doing the one thing. I may very well do one very specific thing, whether that's an offer or a role or whatever. That thing has to become abundantly clear to me that is the thing I want to put all my energy into. And I don't know what it is until it gets revealed to me. The only way it gets revealed to me, and this is what I found, is that if I put out my message. And so for me, I don't see it as, I'm not resistant to being specific. I am going to choose the specificity that I am most drawn to when it comes to me.
Mm.
And so maybe it'll sound a lot like what you're talking about once that piece is very, very clear to me. So I'm not resistant to it at all. I think it's great. I just think you have to be drawn to it. Otherwise, you're forcing it for a monetary or business purpose or some other status purpose that for me will grow dry.
Yeah, no, that checks out. And that, so the way I was thinking about that question, and we really went down a rabbit hole here, didn't we? Was that the way you're holding the liminal space, I find really appealing because of that opportunity cost where we just did quarterly planning last week going into July for Contender. And for me, it's all about focus. It's like, let's focus on perfecting our core offer for our target client. Like, now I'm starting to scale. We've got employees going full time with benefits this month, which
That's cool.
That's intense. And it's like for the first time in my life, it's like, no, we're really focusing. I am saying no to just about everything else to make myself do that, knowing that there's just that piece of me where it's like opportunity cost. Like some awesome opportunity is going to come and I'm going to say no to it to see what happens.
Yeah.
When
you might, that'll be the proof point. And you'll be like, either I chose the right opportunity or there's like this new data point. But listen, like when I read your stuff, it feels so compelling to me that it feels like you have found, there could be other amazing opportunities, but you have found an amazing opportunity that clearly speaks to your creativity, your humor, the way you think about the world in an atypical way that is clearly compelling and magnetic to so many people. And, for everyone listening to this, you need to sign up for the Future of Law Summit that I'm co-hosting it for Good Lawyer, November 21, because Tony is going to be there. He's going to be talking about how you build your brand, how you build community, how you make yourself magnetic. And so, if this spoke to you in any way, we're going to have the link when we put out this episode and the clips where you can go to sign up. It's free. It's virtual. There are no barriers to entry so that you can gather more from, amazingly talented folks like Tony. And so thank you so much, my friend, for sharing your time and your insights and your energy. And I know you get lots of asks for this kind of stuff. And, maybe the kind of closing point about building a brand on LinkedIn is that it's fun when folks like me and you get to ask each other to support our initiatives because we built the bond first, and that makes building a community easier and way more fun. So thank you, my friend, for sharing your time.
I appreciate the opportunity, Chad.
Of course. For everyone out there, have a wonderful day. We'll chat with you again on the next episode.